Where are you? The ceremony is about to start. I yelled into the phone that finally connected to my husband, Mike,
On a family trip overseas.
even though it's our daughter's wedding. That's all I said before Mike just laughed and hung up. Family. I repeated the thought in my mind, now more than ever. I stared at the disconnected phone for a while, but quickly switched gears and contacted someone else. The matter I asked you about earlier, please start it immediately, as quickly as possible. I spoke hurriedly. Yes, I'll leave everything to you, so start right away. I heard a very enthusiastic voice on the other end. By the way, this person is from a civil construction company that has been close to my family for a long time. And I thought to myself, barely holding back my laughter, go ahead. Enjoy your so-called family trip while you can. Because this is going to be your last bit of fun, I think. My name is Kathy Nelson, 52 years old. I am a housewife with 2 children. My husband, Mike, is 55. Our marriage, about 30 years ago, was somewhat of a strategic alliance between our companies. But that marriage is about to end soon because of Mike's repeated problems. However, it wasn't always clear from the start that we would end up this way. At least for me, even though our marriage was mainly a business alliance, I intended to build a warm family with Mike. Mike was like that too at the time. Things changed after we had our 2 kids. Pretty soon after we got married, I became pregnant with our first child, John. And the following year, we had our daughter, Mary. I was happy to have children, but raising them was far more challenging than I had imagined. At that time, Mike, in his early 30s, was still in his training period at his father's company. Perhaps because of this, he was probably under a lot of stress. Even when he came home, he didn't participate in childcare. He did nothing when he saw me overwhelmed with 2 crying children. In fact, something seemed to have cooled in him, and he started spending more and more days away from home under the pretext of work. To be honest, I also have some reflection to do. At that time, I was so caught up in childcare that I thought I could handle everything on my own without anyone's help. The one who helped me was my mother from back home. My parents are gone now, but when I think back to those days, I am deeply grateful for them. Without the housekeeper my mother arranged, I might have fallen into a complete childcare burnout back then. But once that period passed, the children were truly adorable. With Mike spending so much time at his family home or the office, childcare became my purpose in life. But I became suspicious of Mike, who hardly ever came back home, and asked him,
Where do you always go?
Mike used to brush me off with vague words, but when he didn't attend our children's events, I finally asked him directly. And Mike's reply was,
Why don't you just handle that stuff on your own? I've got my own things to take care of.
I couldn't imagine what he meant by things he had to do, leaving our kids' events behind.
What could be more important than our kids' events?
At that moment, I asked, heatedly. Mike's response was,
You know I have a much younger sister, right?
Yes, you mentioned she's 13 years younger. Was her name Rachel?
That's right, Rachel. We're planning her coming of age celebration, so I have a lot to discuss with my parents.
What?
His tone, prioritizing his sister over our children, made me instantly furious. but Mike replied as if it were the most natural thing.
You probably didn't notice because you were so focused on the kids and ignored me. But things have been tough over there too.
I was at a loss for words. But the same thing kept happening. Mike started using his sister as an excuse to skip even kindergarten and elementary school entrance ceremonies. He wouldn't come to our kids' events, but he would attend Rachel's coming-of-age celebration. He wouldn't come to entrance ceremonies, but would attend Rachel's graduation ceremony. Where was Mike's home? And who did he consider his family? I wondered this countless times. So I attended our children's events alone, their kindergarten entrance, graduation, and elementary school entrance ceremonies. There were no pictures of their father in any of their commemorative photos. Eventually, our children realized that their father never participated in their events. After that, as they went through exams, advanced to higher education, and got jobs, they handled everything on their own. Both of them started figuring out what they wanted to do and looking for schools that matched those interests, considering if they could take the entrance exams there. They only asked me for advice when they had already decided, saying things like, "I want to go here. What should I do?"
I don't want to burden you, Mom.
Mary said, even back in middle school. Knowing what you want to do isn't bad. It shows they are very independent. But it makes me sad that they figured out their father wasn't reliable. My life hasn't exactly been a good example. Since getting married, I've been a full-time housewife. Well, sometimes I'd be called to help with my family's company. My parents seem to have planned to leave me some assets early on, and my brother supported this idea. By the way, my parents passed away about 10 years ago. They were both still in their 70s. My brother, Jake, took over the company, and I inherited a portion of the estate. As for Mike's sister, Rachel, who was constantly being taken care of by Mike and his parents, she went from being pampered through her coming-of-age celebration and college graduation to getting a job at a subsidiary thanks to their father's connections. But it seems she never really intended to work. After 2 years, she quit, saying she was going to focus on becoming a bride. Apparently, she didn't like working and spent her days lazing around at home. And neither her parents nor Mike said anything about it. They seemed to be happy that she wasn't working, thinking it was probably too much for her anyway. She actively participated in arranged marriage meetings, but for some reason, they always fell through. Most of the time, Mike was the one opposing them, and Rachel would accept his opposition without question.
If Mike says so, then it must be.
Before I knew it, she was in her 40s. She was still unmarried and just living as she had been. By the way, Mike's parents, Ken and Susan, are now in their 80s. Unlike my parents, who passed away early, they are still active and healthy, though it's normal to worry at their age. But Rachel does nothing and still lives freely. Since Ken is still the company president and in good health, there's no sign of Mike becoming president anytime soon. Mike wants to become president as soon as possible, but Ken won't step down. I don't know why. I've long since lost patience with Mike. My brother and his wife have told me to leave him whenever it suits me, and now that our kids are independent, I'm planning to start my second life. Fortunately, my parents transferred a considerable amount of their assets to me early on. With that, I could start something new or take a break for a while. I had thought about this slowly over a long time. I was also gathering evidence to put myself in a favorable position for the divorce. Jake's lawyer was helping me with all that. But then something happened that put those plans on hold for a while. Mary was getting married. Her fiancé was 8 years older than her, and someone she met as her boss at Jake's company. He was quite capable, and it was said he would be transferred to an overseas branch soon. By the way, Mary never mentioned her family connections at work, learning from Rachel's example.
Only a fool would brag about such things. It's the same in school. If you flaunt your wealth, people will hate you.
That's what Mary said. I tried to inform Mike about the wedding, but as expected, Mike kept saying he was busy and would quickly leave whenever I brought it up. Oh, is that so? I would just say that, seeing him act this way. I still sent him the date and location via invitations and messages. However, I didn't bother to confirm the details with Mike. And on the day of the wedding, we all headed to the wedding venue. But even that morning, there was no sign of Mike showing up. I tried to contact him. Where are you? The ceremony is about to start.
On a family trip overseas.
I blinked in surprise at those words. Even though it's our daughter's wedding? Mike just laughed and hung up. I looked up at the ceiling for a few seconds. Family, huh? Family. I repeated the word in my mind several times. It was probably his parents and Rachel he went overseas with. I knew it, but this was still incredibly disappointing. To Mike, family meant his parents and Rachel, not us. Of course, I've known this for a long time. I never expected much from a strategic marriage. He probably thought the same. The only difference was that I initially wanted to build a family with Mike. But Mike didn't. I dragged it on for over 20 years for the sake of the kids. The kids might not have cared whether their father was there or not. Still, I wanted to maintain some semblance of family until they became independent. That was probably just my selfishness. The kids might have found it much easier without that pretense. Well, it's fine. I took a deep breath and made another call. Hello, it's me. Yes, Kathy Nelson, about the matter we discussed earlier. Please start it immediately, as soon as possible. I spoke quickly to the slightly distant voice on the other end. Yes, I'll leave everything to you, so start right away. I heard a very enthusiastic voice in response. By the way, this person was from a construction company that had been close to my family for a long time. And I thought to myself, barely holding back my laughter, go ahead, enjoy your so-called family trip while you can. Because this will be your last bit of fun, I think. So, a month later, I received a call. I answered it on my tablet. There, with a broad smile on his face, was my lawyer.
Ms. Nelson, or rather, I should say Ms. Turner now.
The lawyer called me by my maiden name. So, the papers have been accepted? My voice couldn't help but lift.
Yes, everything has been properly taken care of.
The lawyer on the screen worked for my family's company. I continued, asking him, so, can you tell me what happened over the past 2 weeks?
Of course, I anticipated you'd want to know, so I have everything ready.
I smiled at the lawyer on the screen. Currently, there is a half-world distance between me and the lawyer. Yes, I've bought a house overseas and am living there now. You see, my daughter's husband was transferred to an overseas branch after their marriage, as had been mentioned before. Mary said.
He was worried about my language skills. But you never know until you go, and once you're there, you'll manage somehow. So, it's fine. That's how I've always handled things.
With such a confident statement, Mary and her husband are now at the overseas branch, and I live in a separate building on their property, partly for security reasons. The lawyer on the screen seemed to adjust some equipment.
First, there's this.
What he showed me was what happened during Mike and his family's overseas trip.
Wait a minute. Why can't we get into this hotel today?
That was Ken yelling. Under the bright blue sky, he was wearing an aloha shirt.
I'm sorry, but today the hotel is reserved for a wedding and the following party.
What? This is the best hotel in Bali.
The wedding in Bali that day was for Mary and her husband. By the way, Mike and his family flew from the U.S. to Java, but we had already gone directly to Bali. We planned to enjoy a relaxing resort stay and then have the ceremony. They had no idea about this. I did try to contact them that day, but not even knowing we were in Bali. How ridiculous. It really showed how little they cared about us,
It's strange.
said the lawyer.
Kathy, you did inform them of the destination, right?
I did, by letter and message, since they were usually unreachable. The call on the day of the ceremony was just for their family trip show-off. The lawyer laughed at this. I clearly left instructions that the wedding would be held overseas. The location was noted as this hotel in Bali. Yet here they are, complaining they can't get into the hotel.
They should have at least mentioned they were there for the wedding.
The image showed Mike's family grumbling in front of the hotel. Rachel was also there, looking confused, as if she didn't understand what was being said. The explanation was in English, but the surrounding whispers were in Indonesian. She had supposedly studied in college and might have been somewhat conversational. But after a 20-year gap, she no longer understood Indonesian at all. By the way, I could hear the employees whispering that these people were supposed to attend the wedding today. In fact, we had instructed the staff accordingly. If these people said they were here to attend the wedding, let them in. But if they were just here for dining or lodging, don't let them in because we had the venue booked for the ceremony. The wedding was grand, and my daughter and her husband, along with us, departed from Bali's airport to the overseas branch the same day. We had no intention of returning to the U.S. Meanwhile, the infuriated group apparently planned to return to the U.S. from the same airport. But they were stopped there. This was because Mike's credit cards were no longer working. The staff who had been following them captured the scene on video.
What? How can the credit not work? This one too.
Yes, sir. None of these are in your name, correct?
That's exactly what happened. Mike took my credit cards and bank cards, so I canceled them. Those accounts contained my personal assets. Mike had attempted to use them, but I pretended not to notice. I knew that doing such things would eventually get exposed. I had another account I could freely use, so even if one was drained, my living situation wouldn't be affected. I let it slide to gather evidence.
Damn it. Why aren't they working?
Because the owner canceled them, of course.
If that's the case, we can't get back. We don't have enough cash.
The staff sighed at the sight of the enraged Mike and said as they escorted them out of the airport.
In any case, these cards are not usable, so you cannot board the flight to the US.
They had no choice but to return to Java and borrow money from the consulate to get home. This took a considerable amount of time. Apparently, it didn't occur to them to seek help from the consulate right away. They tried borrowing money from acquaintances out of embarrassment, which delayed them further. When that failed, they finally turned to the consulate. By then, their planned stay had expired, and they were out of options. A consulate gave them a hard time, because their issue stemmed from card cancellations. Their actions were deemed problematic, and they were detained briefly. Eventually, they managed to return to the U.S., repaid the consulate with their funds, and went back home to complain to me. But they found nothing there. The sight of them at that moment was too much to hold back my laughter.
What is this?
Mike yelled in front of the empty lot. His parents dropped their bags. Our house was newly built nearly 30 years ago by my parents as a home for us when we got married. It was always well maintained, so we could have sold it if we wanted to. But it was my property, and since I planned to live abroad, I wanted to leave nothing behind. I stored Mike's belongings in a storage unit and hired a company to dispose of everything else. That was the other call I made on the day of the wedding.
What on earth?
Mike scratched his head, stomped his feet, and finally knelt on the ground, pounding his fists on his suitcase. I couldn't hold back my laughter anymore, and I burst out laughing. Mary came over, hearing my laughter.
What's going on, Mom?
A situation.
He's not my dad anymore.
Mary looked at the screen I pointed to. On the screen, in front of the empty lot, stood a sign that read "For Sale," and the area was completely cleared.
Oh, this is where our house used to be. It's really empty now,
Mary said with a wry smile. During her teenage years, Mary had found it extremely creepy that her father lavished so much attention on her aunt instead of her. I knew she often said she wanted to cut ties with him as soon as possible.
I'm glad your daughter is happy with the outcome too,
said the lawyer. Thank you for the amusing video. But that's not all, is it? I asked.
No, there's more.
The lawyer smirked.
Next is this.
Once again, Mike appeared on screen, glaring angrily at something.
What is the meaning of this?
I heard the sound of a desk being struck.
It's simple. Your wife, Kathy, has asked for the divorce papers to be filled out.
Kathy would never say that.
Why are you so sure?
Mike seemed to think of something.
The cards. Why did she cancel the cards?
The lawyer responded as if it were obvious.
Of course, she would. Anyone would cancel their cards if they found out someone was using large amounts of their money without permission. Why were you using Kathy's cards? Didn't you have your own?
Mike fell silent.
Or was your financial situation that tight?
We had already looked into it. Honestly, there wasn't much money in Mike's and his parents' accounts. Most of the funds for running the business came from my savings. Mike had taken my cards, assuming it was all family money. I never gave him permission, so it was only natural for me to cancel them.
Upon investigation, we found that a significant amount had been used.
Used? But isn't it marital property?
No, it isn't. Didn't you know?
The lawyer asked curiously.
You were using Kathy's assets that she had before the marriage.
Premarital? No, that can't be. Kathy never mentioned that.
She didn't need to. As long as nothing happened, it was fine. But something did happen.
What are you talking about?
Mike stood up.
Kathy said there was no point in being family with you, and your children no longer see you as their father.
What?
Of course, do you know which colleges your daughter and son attended, what they studied, or who they married? Most importantly, do you know where your daughter's wedding took place?
Mike's words caught in his throat. The lawyer then mentioned the date and location of Mary's wedding. Mike's expression changed instantly. "No way," he murmured.
Yes, it was the hotel you tried to stay at that day.
Mike leaned forward.
Didn't you hear there was a wedding there that day?
Well, yes, but I didn't think it was. If it was, why didn't they let us in?
That's simple.
The lawyer explained what I had instructed the hotel to do.
Kathy said she had informed you in advance. Why don't you check your phone? Haven't you been checking it? Or were you using another phone?
Bombarded with these questions, Mike fell silent. It was obvious now. Maybe Mike had multiple phones and probably kept the one that could reach me turned off. I had guessed this since my messages were never read. If I asked if he had changed his phone, he would have reluctantly given me the number. But I chose not to ask. It was part of my plan. I had proof that I sent messages and left numerous voicemails. "Are you listening? Did you hear? Please check." I had recorded myself getting increasingly agitated. Of course, the messages were the same. I had tried every possible method, but Mike shut out all means of reaching him.
So,
Continued the lawyer.
Kathy will also be seeking compensation from you for the unauthorized use of her funds and for neglecting the family. And by the way, your family has been informed that the financial support to your company will be terminated.
No. Let me see Kathy. Let me talk to her.
Mike pleaded, almost in tears.
That's impossible.
Why? Where is Kathy?
She's no longer in the U.S.
Mike's expression at that moment was indescribable.
After the wedding, Kathy and everyone else went abroad immediately.
What?
And while you were held back, they left calmly.
Mike clenched his fists and trembled with anger. Mary, watching from the side, couldn't help but giggle. The lawyer turned to us and asked,
How do you feel about this?
"It's a very entertaining video. Is there more?" I asked. "Yes," replied the lawyer.
This was recorded when Jake and I visited their company to terminate the business partnership after Kathy's divorce was finalized.
He showed me another video.
Termination of support. What's the meaning of this? How can this be? Our company can't survive without your support.
Now it was Mike's parents raising their voices. Both had well-tanned faces as they asked,
Indeed. Oh, and where did you get those tans? Have you been on a trip?
On the screen, Jake was asking Ken a question.
To the wedding.
Mary's wedding?
Yes, we were at Mary's wedding in Bali.
Jake gave a sly smile.
The thing is, I was there that day.
Both Ken and Susan gasped.
Of course, I was there. She's my niece, after all. My wife and I attended the wedding in Bali. And by the way, we heard all about what you were doing that day.
Cold sweat began to drip down Ken and Susan's faces.
And you couldn't even remember Mary's name right away? How little interest did you have in those kids?
Jake pressed them.
They are your only two grandchildren, and you can't remember one of their names? What does that say about you?
Well, they never really warmed up to us.
Warm up? Did you ever do anything for them?
Both fell silent again. Suddenly, there was a loud noise as someone burst into the room.
Wow, she's huge. How old is she now?
Mary gasped and spoke aloud. Suddenly, Rachel appeared on the screen. Rachel is 42.
She's 10 years older than my husband. Oh no. She's been living like a child in her parents' home.
Indeed, today's term for it fits perfectly. Come to think of it, she's been living in her parents' home for 20 years. What will she do now? I looked back at the screen.
What are we going to do without the financial support? What about me?
Rachel was demanding answers from her parents, not the lawyer.
Well, I don't know.
Ken could only mumble.
Well, the divorce is finalized, and there's no reason for us to lend you any more money.
What? Why did you let the divorce go through?
Don't you get it? It's because you misused the funds.
But it was marital property.
Jake sighed.
That's what Mike said. We were worried about that, which is why we gave Kathy her inheritance before she got married.
So, you didn't trust us.
Would you trust someone who misuses their wife's assets? And how long did your son neglect his wife and kids?
Ken and Susan fell silent again.
Even as an uncle, I attended those kids' events. And Kathy came too. The fact that you didn't hear about it shows that they stopped considering you as family long ago.
Jake seemed to be enjoying the chance to criticize Ken and Susan.
Just like you saw those three as a different family. Oh, and Mike told Kathy that he was going overseas with his family on the wedding day.
Ken looked up in shock, and Susan covered her face.
Who did he mean by family?
Jake smiled at them.
So, it's over. How was that?
Thank you. I'm very satisfied. Please continue with the remaining procedures.
There's not much left to do.
I laughed and exchanged smiles with Mary. The lawyer kept me updated on what happened next. Sometimes I also received updates from Jake. Jake's company absorbed Ken and Susan's company when they faced bankruptcy due to the lack of financial support. He had to save the employees at all costs. The reason my parents supported that company was because of the quality of the employees' work, not because of Ken and Susan's management. I hadn't heard all the details from my parents, but Jake explained this to me. Ken was removed from his position as president. Ken and Susan sold their house and land and moved into a rental. They are now struggling to figure out what to do next. The whole ordeal aged them rapidly, and they've developed health issues they were previously managing through sheer willpower. Mike, now realizing the need for a retirement home, is panicking because it's financially challenging to secure a spot now. Mike managed to get a job at a friend's company. His friend, from past interactions, let him join the company. However, due to the recent divorce, they realized he was an unreliable person. So they demoted him from a permanent employee to a contract worker. This meant they could easily fire him if anything happened. Despite this being lenient, I hope Mike continues to work to help repay his debts. As for Rachel, things are tough. She now lives with her parents in a rental. Having lived at home for 20 years, she's incapable of doing much. Her savings are depleted, so her parents are desperately trying to convince her to work, and she's now regularly visiting the job center. However, her job expectations are too high, and she can't seem to secure anything. Well, that's only natural. Marriage as a solution seems far-fetched given her circumstances. What has she been doing for the past 20 years? I can only wonder. Meanwhile, our life overseas is bright and cheerful. Of course, living abroad comes with its risks. My son, John, who lives in the U.S., worries and calls often, and I assure him we're fine. I encourage him to visit, preferably with a good wife, but he shyly avoids the topic. As long as we live in safe areas, our life here is peaceful. Learning the language slowly, making friends with other American families, and enjoying the bright sunshine and dry breeze. I wonder what to do next. Timing is crucial for a divorce. My 30-year marriage wasn't all bad, but letting go at this moment opened up new possibilities for me. I look forward to a vibrant and joyful future with my daughter and her husband.